a unstructured data, not as a database, not as rows and columns, but as data. On the data, the program has to run, and that is where we will use the MapReduce programming paradigm. MapReduce is the default method or default programming language, programming paradigm, which is used to connect with the HDFS, that is the Hadoop distributed file system. HDFS, as we have discussed in the previous session, was built on the Google file system, GFS, right? So now on Hadoop MapReduce, as we look at, so the MapReduce is the system which is used to process the data in the Hadoop cluster. So the program paradigm itself is map and reduce two phases or two components which are there in every program, right? There is a mapper program and there is a reducer. There is a mapper task and reducer task, they say, or mapper function and reducer function. So you have two these functions, and basically the language that is used is Java, and we write a Java mapper function and Java reducer function. Maybe sometime tomorrow I will show you some snippets, or maybe today also in the there is a pseudocode you can understand. But how it is actually written as part of the program paradigm is what we can see. So each map task operates on a discrete portion or one block of the overall data set. And similarly, the MapReduce system totally distributes the intermediate data to nodes which perform the reduce task. So there is a map task and there is a reduce task, and together they become the MapReduce environment. We'll take a small example to understand how MapReduce is done. This is called the word count program, right? You want to count the number of words. Let us say I give you a C program and I ask you to do a MapReduce kind of thing. But of course, I ask you this problem statement and I say, I give you a file, or I give you a Word document, right? In the Word document, I want you to count how many words are there. It's a very simple program, right? How do you count the number of words? You have to create tokens. All the words which are continuously placed in adjacent location becomes a word. And after that, if there is a space, the word ends. And the beginning of the next thing is another word, right? So if a particular character is not a space, and the next character, that is the next index of that array, you can say, or a file pointer, you can say. If you consider that a particular file pointer is pointing to a particular character and the character is not a space and the next character is a space, then we consider that whole thing as a word. Like that, we can calculate all the words, right? Now, I want you to not only count how many words are there, but I want how many times each word is coming in the count, right? Each word in the sense, now let us say, take an example, the cat sat on the mat. In this, if I want to count the number of words, I want to count how many times the has come. So the has come 2 times. Cat has come once. Sat has come once. On has come once. Okay, and mat has come once. So that is the kind of this thing that we can look at, right? But if you look at these 2 sentences, then you can try to come up with that idea of how things happen, right? So what actually is happening here, if we try to understand, we need to count. So now how do I arrange all these? And finally, the result must be, I want to get the result, each word, how many times it is coming. That is a word count program. Now, if I want to see how many times each word is coming, now how do I present the result at the end? The result at the end is presented in an ascending order, obviously, right? So you start with A, B, C, like that, and then you give how many times different characters, different words with starting with A, starting with B, starting with C has come, right? So you create first you have to create all the tokens, then you have to sort all the tokens, then all the tokens which have been sorted should be grouped if they are same, and then you must count it, right? So that is what is the program, right? So in a huge file, let us say some book, there are so many words. No, I want to count how many the are there, how many and are there, how many or are there, like that. I want to call all the words that are there in the entire book, right? So that's a huge program. So let us take that as an example to understand MapReduce. So what happens, this is the input to the mapper. So first we are writing the mapper function. This is the map function. And usually in Hadoop, the input is taken as a key value pair. It is called key and value pair, right? So for each word W in the input value, whatever is the input value, so this is the input value. So here we are giving it a key and a value pair. What is the key? Key is the line number, maybe you can say, or the number of the whatever you can say in the this thing, and then there is a value. Value is a string of words, right? So every line, the string of words are given. So that is what. So what you do, you take that input value for every word in the input value. What you do, you emit W and 1. You emit the word, and along with that, so again it becomes a key value pair. What is the key now? Key now is the word and the value is 1. So again a key value pair. The input is a key value pair. The output is a key value pair, right? So for each word W in the input voice, input value, you show. So the input value is the cat sat on the mat. So what happens? The 1, cat 1, sat 1, on 1, the 1, mat 1 is given. Similarly, the second sentence is the aardvark sat on the sofa. The 1, aardvark 1, sat 1, on 1, the 1, sofa 1. So this is what is. So how to write a Java program? Java program, you can find the tokens of these, and then you can say for every token you give an output of token and 1. So you get an output like this. So for every character, for every word, a number 1 is outputted. So it is called a word, and so it is becoming a key and a value pair, and the value is always 1 in this case, right? So this is the mapper function, first part. So let us take the mapper input is something like this. The mapper output is something like this. The cat sat on the mat, all ones. The aardvark sat on the sofa, all ones, right? So after that, as we go, we try to write the reduce function. What is the reduce function? The reduce function is the output key, which is their intermediate values. Now there is something which has happened. Okay, what was the input here? The output is W1. But when I come here, it says output key and intermediate values. Now, what is the intermediate values is what we understand. But anyway, we'll look at the reduce program. The reduce program says set count is equal to 0. So for how many counts are there for a particular V. So for each V in the intermediate values, so intermediate values will have different words, right? So for each V, if a V is coming in the intermediate values, you increment count plus is equal to V. So how many times that particular word comes, you increment the value V. So finally, count is incremented, and then output key is equal to the count. The output key and count will come. So output key is the actual time, and how many times the intermediate values are coming. So you increment the intermediate values by each time you increase the value. Count plus is equal to each time you add it, and then each time the value 1 comes, you add it to count, and then it becomes like that, and then you emit counted value. So what has happened here? So this is said to be the reducer input. Now you see the reducer input. Reducer input is slightly different from the mapper output. This is the mapper output. Mapper output is all ones. Reducer input is slightly different. Now it would be a wonderful question to think for some time to answer how this output, how this input has come, how the mapper output has become the reducer input. Mapper output is here, all ones. Reducer input has a different combination. Now how are they grouped together? So are they grouped together and arranged in the sense that whatever is coming only once it is mentioned here, whatever is coming two it is mentioned later. But here there is an anomaly, right? Whatever is 4 as mentioned towards the end, but here there is only 1. So it is not that 1's come first, then 2's come, then 3's come, then 4's come. No, it is not the logic here. What is the logic? The logic is ascending order, right? It started with A and C, then M, then O, then S, then S, then T. SA and then SO, then T. So the ascending order. And then the numbers, how many times they appear. Okay. And then the lowercase and uppercase is also changed. It is similar. So uppercase and lowercase are same. They are considered to be same. So the has come uppercase many times. Uppercase it has come twice, and lowercase it has come twice, but then it has converted to a lowercase only. So there is something which is happening between reducer input and mapper output. After mapper output, okay, as we see here, the reducer input is changed. So there is some sorting which is being done. And now the question is, who does the sorting? Because you are going to write the program for mapping. You are going to write the program for reducer. But who is doing the sorting in between? So that is also a good question. That is what is Hadoop doing. So a lot of abstract complexity is being handled by Hadoop. So that is what we see. So now what has happened here? As we see, aardvark, that is the key, and the value is 1. Cat 1, mat 1. On, it is the intermediate values. What are the intermediate values? 1 and 1. Now what should I do? For each v, for each value that is on in the intermediate values, count plus is equal to v. So 1 is there, then 1 is there. For each v in the intermediate values, count is incremented. So output key, the output key is on. For each on there, whatever intermediate values are there, they are counted to this and count. So finally, the output is output key plus count. So what happens? On becomes 1 plus 1. So it becomes on and 2. The becomes 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. It becomes the comma 4. So that is what actually happens. So what is the reducer output? Reducer output is how many words are there and how many times they are being emitted. So this is what is a MapReduce environment. So very simply you understood, but now what we need to do is we need to write a mapper function and a reducer function. So that is another important aspect of it. Okay, maybe some snapshot, some examples maybe we'll see tomorrow of the MapReduce code, right? So what exactly is happening in the whole process? This is the mapper input, this is the mapping process, and this is the reducing function, and the reducing shuffling was done, which was basically sorting and grouping of these numbers together, right? Firstly, it was sorted, and then it found that on is coming 2 times, sat is coming 2 times, and the is coming 4 times. So all of them are grouped together, and then now reducing is basically to count how many times it is coming. So the count is finally totally counted. So that is what is the reducer. So that becomes the reducer output. So this is what is the complete MapReduce mechanism. Now how it is done? If you look at it, first it is node 1 has some data. So there are some blocks and there is some mapping process which goes on, and then an output comes. So this is the mapper input and this is the mapper output. The mapper output is shuffled and sorted here. Shuffling and sorting takes place. And then again, this becomes the reducer input and the reducing process, and this becomes the reducer output, or in fact finally the output that is coming. So the input in node 1, some data blocks are executed, a mapping process happens, new blocks are created, again they are shuffled and sorted across along with node 1 node to node 3. Again different combinations do come in. So node 1 has different blocks, node 2 has different blocks, node 3 has different blocks. Again the reducing process happens, and then a final output is created. So this is how the MapReduce goes on. So if you look at the whole process, component wise or logical wise, how it happens, the MapReduce program is fed into what is as a JVM code on the client node. Client node is where the task tracker node and the job tracker node are the actual what we call the Hadoop clients. But sorry, the Hadoop system, the system components. These are the system components. Job tracker node is running on the name node, and task tracker node is running on the data node, right? And then you have a client who is accessing from a client node. A client is sending a MapReduce program onto a job client, and then he is saying you get it. So it goes and gets a job tracker ID, and then the HDFS file system, it is shared. So it then the job tracker is splitting into heartbeat also is there, and then it becomes a task tracker. Task tracker will run the Java code and the what is called Java and map and reduce task, which is running here. So there is a child which is created for the task track, and then it can be either a map task or a reduce task, and then it works on the HDFS. And finally, you get a result. So this is how the process goes on, right? So this is where the data is running, and you get the result. So, of course, maybe MapReduce is quite simply explained, but maybe we can take up a program tomorrow, and then I will briefly give a demonstration of how it looks like, right? So, SQL to Hadoop, we have discussed the scoop. So, it's a tool to import any JDBC supported databases into Hadoop. So, you can either move from Oracle to HDFS or HDFS to Oracle. So Aura OOP export is there, or Aura OOP import is there. developed in Cloudera, some of these ecosystem components. Flume, you can collect from internet and you can gather the logs and you can store them in HDFS directly. As and when they are generated, Flume can connect it and then directly store it. I will show you some examples of how data was collected using Flume. Twitter data was collected using Flume directly and stored in database on the Hadoop environment, and then it was evaluated by MapReduce codes. This is the Flume architecture. Then HBase is basically based on the design of Google Bigtable. I mentioned earlier, it's a column family store. We will see the different types of database stores that are there. So we'll try to understand this as well. And it provides interactive access to information and holds extremely large data sets. So multi-terabyte of data. And then it's again a key value pair. HBase is a columnar data store. That is what is column family store. We'll understand this a little later. This is the HBase architecture, how it is stored inside. Hive is an SQL-based data warehousing application. So it supports a lot of SQL-like functions like select, join, group by, and all. And you can have some of the examples like this. So this is where Hive can be used to get data. And basically, Pig is a Pig Latin is the actual name. It's a data flow oriented language, scripting language like JavaScript. So you have sets, associative arrays, tuples, and you can do routing data, easy integration with Java. So you have this scripting kind of things which are used in JavaScript. You can do that in Pig Latin or short form is Pig. Oozie is a coordination service where these jobs, MapReduce jobs and task, mapper task and reducer task are managed. So this is how the things are done. And Oozie is the coordination service that is used. Zookeeper is a distributed consensus engine and provides well-defined concurrent access semantics. So service discovery, leader election, distributed locking, and it's a coordination service, it's a consensus engine which takes care of that, right? So this was the first part of it, and then we'll move to the next part. 1 minute. Let me... So the NoSQL databases. So NoSQL databases, of course, maybe time may not be sufficient to go through each of these in detail. But as I mentioned in the morning, NoSQL stands for not only SQL. That means NoSQL doesn't mean SQL is not there, but it means not only SQL. NoSQL is a new form of SQL. In fact, they say it is new SQL also is there. NoSQL is there, and before that normal SQL, structured query language, is there. Basically, it's a class of non-relational data storage system because SQL is structured query language, but structured query language is usually relational, right? The rows and columns have some meaning, right? But here it is NoSQL because it is non-relational data storage system. Usually, it does not require a fixed schema. Table schema is not there, and you cannot also apply joins here. Right, and all NoSQL offerings relax one or more of the ACID properties. I don't know how many of you remember ACID properties. ACID properties you have studied maybe in DBMS, right? Atomicity, consistency, integrity, and anybody remembers D? Right, so you must be aware of them, right? Anyway, but then there is an important theorem called CAP theorem, right? We will come to that. So data storage and RDBMS cannot be the end all, and it cannot be the all in all, right? RDBMS cannot happen. So as there are different programming languages, we also need to have different storage tools, right? So earlier NoSQL was not acceptable, but now it is definitely last years compared to last few years, NoSQL solution is more acceptable. Earlier, only an SQL kind of a data was easily understood, but now a non-structured or unstructured data is also easily understood. So let's look at what is a CAP theorem. CAP theorem talks about three parts, right? What is consistency, one is availability, and one is partition tolerance. So at any given instance of time, so two must be there. So let's understand what is first, before you understand the CAP theorem, let us understand what is consistency. So consistency talks about once a writer has written, all readers will see that, right? That is consistency. So the data is consistent. So when a writer is writing, nobody will read, right? After a writer has written, then only the readers will see that, right? If somebody is writing, nobody will read. So that is consistency is maintained like that. Availability, system is available during the software and hardware upgrades and node failures. Even if a node fails, the system is available. That is, you can still work with the system because there is a redundant data which is available, which they will give. Now, partition tolerant, a system can continue to operate in the presence of a network partition failure. Now, here there are two racks have failed. These are all working fine, but two racks have failed, or all these rack has failed. But still, the data is available here also, so it goes on. So, partition tolerance. In case of one part fails, still it is working. Now, CAP theorem talks about you can have at most two of these properties for any shared data system. So, any shared data system, you can have two. So, these are the four properties that we look at: acid, atomic, consistent, isolated, and durable. Atomic means all operations in a transaction succeed on every operation is rolled back. You are aware of this in DBMS, since I am skipping it. So consistent, on the completion of transaction, the database is structurally sound. There is no anomaly. There is no, it is not wavering. It is very straightforward. So that is what. Isolated transactions do not contend with one another. Contentious access to data is moderated by the database. Durable, the results are permanent, right? So that is what. Then the opposite is base, basic availability. Database appears to work most of the time, and that is BA. S is a soft state. Stores do not have write consistent nor do different replicas have to be mutually consistent all the times. So that is a soft state. And eventually, it becomes consistent. So stores exhibit consistency at some later point of time lazily. That is what is base. So CAP theorem talks about these things, and as you look at any two of them, you can get a category. Right? Consistency and availability, if you focus, you go to the RDBMS, and Greenplum is another example. If you look at consistent and partitioning, you have Bigtable, Hypertable, HBase, MongoDB and all that, right? If you look at partition and availability, you look at CouchDB, Dynamo, Cassandra, SimpleDB, and also Voldemort, right? So like that, now these are all databases in this sense. So consistency, availability, and partition, any two of them. So based on any two of them, a database can come up. So this is what is CAP. You can have at most two of these properties for any shared data system. So at most two properties you can have, the third can be compromised. If the third is compromised, right? In this case, availability is compromised, only consistent and partition. In this case, partition and availability is focused, consistency is compromised in this list, right? So that is how you can look at. Now, based on this, we have different NoSQL options. So the first one is key value pairs. So that is Redis, Voldemort, and Memcached. These are there. So extremely simple. Basically, a key value pair. So initially, this was the default option in HDFS or Hadoop systems. A key value pair. The key value data stores were used, or the data storage was there. And there are a variety of operations like insert, fetch, update, delete, and some allow non-uniform columns within a value also, and some allow fetch on a range of keys. So variety of things are there. So these are different examples. So the key value store is a first type. The second one is a document store. Instead of key value, except that the value is a document. It's a document store. Earlier was a key value store or a value store. This is a key document store. So the key document instead of value, value is a document. So it's a key document store, or it's called the document stores. So it's a data model. So you have a key and a document pair. The document is basically either a JSON file. JSON is JavaScript object notation. It's a new format like XML. XML is extended markup language, and other semi-structured formats the data document can be. Basic operations are same, but the examples are CouchDB, MongoDB, and SimpleDB. Then there are column stores, which was the default of the thing, because HBase was the basic thing. So the column store, Cassandra, SimpleDB also is based on that. So it's a multi-dimensional map. Not all entries are relevant each time. A multi-dimensional map in the sense columns, or rows and columns. So basically a column store, right? And lastly, you have what is called graph stores. Graph stores are basically the data model where it is nodes and edges. The graph kind of a structure. So nodes have a property, edges may have labels or roles. So that is how it is. So examples are Neo4j, FlogDB, Titan, Pregel, and RDF triple stores can map to graph databases. So Titan was one of the things that we worked on. We could store data on that. Of course, Prigel, Neo4j, they are all used in semantic web also, but then they are graph stores, so the graph databases. And then we had the query languages which were there called Gremlin, and we could work with Gremlin and Titan, right? We never heard these words, but this was as a part of the project with IBM gave a project to some students, undergraduate students from MNIT, and I was mentoring them. And then at that time, the researcher from IBM told about first time I've heard about Titan and Gremlin. And then students picked up, downloaded this because they were open source. But we never heard, we never were taught that there was a Titan graph database. So we didn't hear that, but it was fortunate that when we worked on that, we could get that. So RDF triple stores can map to graph database. So these are different examples: MongoDB, CouchDB, Gemfire, Redis, Cassandra, Memcached, Hazelcast, HBase, Amnesia, Neo4j, right? And this is a big diagram that you can look at. So if you understand the relational databases, these are all the relational databases. Oracle, which are basically used for analytics, Oracle, IBM DB2, SQL Server, and all. And the new SQL, so the MySQL cluster, Clustrix, there are a variety of things which have come in. So these are called what are called new SQL. These are no SQL, which are four types: key value pair, document value pair, graph, basically Neo4j, GraphDB is mentioned here in the big tables. That is the key value pair or columnar stores, right? HBase, Cassandra is basically coming in between both of them. So you have the data in grid cache, which is running down. On top of that, you have the non-relational databases and relational databases. Similarly, under non-relational, you have NoSQL, and then in the relational, you have new SQL, right? So this is how the thing works, right? So just let me give you an introduction to some research case studies, and then I will conclude with Spark today. So let me start with some research case studies which we did so that you will understand actually. So undergraduate students took up this example of integrating movie data info and information and trying to get. So there were databases. We try to create something like a Make My Trip, right? Make My Trip, what it does, it gets information from SpiceJet, Indigo, AirAsia, and all that, right? Different air companies or bus companies, maybe Red Bus. If you take the example, all different vendors of the bus companies, they join together and you can book tickets and you can make reservation, right? So in a similar sense, there are so many recommendation sites which are coming from various data sets, and then maybe we can combine and suggest and build a better recommendation system. So that was what was thought about. So movie data could be collected from IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, and Twitter. A lot of tweets about that particular movie handle. So students chose a movie called Dark Knight Rises, right? So you have this movie, and then you collect a lot of information about the thing. So the IMDb has its own links. You can collect comments. You can collect who the actors are, who is the director. All the information is available on the website. So what you need to do is what is called web scraping. You log into the website and then you give the movie name. So obviously, or the string to be searched. So it searches for you. And then you go and find out and scrap all the information which is related, which you want to. So because they know that they are doing a movie data set, so they did a lot of things. So on Rotten Tomatoes is another a website which talks about movies, and you can buy tickets and also on that again you have a score also. Rotten Tomatoes gives a score, right? So and then it gives a lot of information. Of course, the pictures are not copied, but who is the what is the opinion about others, what is the feedback, all that information is collected from Rotten Tomatoes. Similarly, Metacritic has a Metacritic score for that particular movie, and then user details are given, and reviews are given, and percentage is given. So you can create that particular aspect of it, and then you can try to look at that. So these inputs are coming. Similarly, tweets for the movie, there'll be a handle for Twitter Night Rises, so the Dark Knight Rises. So you go there and then you link it up. So you will get all the tweets which have come and all the replies and all the photos that have been placed. Then you can understand what the people are also feeling based on the tweets. So the tweets were collected. Here, Flume was used to collect the tweets and then analyze the tweets, right? So that is the kind of mechanism. So all these kind of information is usually collected. A movie has a lot of information, and who are the actors, who are the directors, and all. Now we put all of this data onto a Titan graph database, right? So it was very easy. So what has happened is, once we put it in a graph database, if the actor has acted in, let us say, 5-10 movies, right? All those 5-10 movies are linked with the actor's name. If there are some female actors, right? So along with the female actors, so there may be some combinations which both this male actor and female actor have acted together, and there may be others where they have acted with other heroines. So the graph is built in such a way, right? And the type graph database was fully developed, and what is the genre, what is the reviews, what is the trends, and all these things are actually captured. So the method was to collect the data from the data source selection and create a dump from the web scraping that I talked about. Then you parse and refine it, create a JSON file, JavaScript object notation file, and then upload on the graph database. So different commands to get the dumps. Python URL lib package is there, or wget, or curl. So from these, you get the different commands can be used on Python, and use a regular expression to put the data in the desired format. Maybe the RE module in Python is used, and you get a lot of these match and find all and search, substitute, split, compile function, and all these they are used. Then the JSON file is created, which is like a Excel file, but there is an object notation that we use, JavaScript. So it's basically a text format, and it's language dependent, and refined data is converted into a key value data, okay, and then stored in Python ordered dictionary. And then JSON module is used. This dictionary-based data store is stored in a properly formatted JSON file, and JSON file is uploaded onto Titan graph database via Gremlin. I was talking about Gremlin. Gremlin is the graph query language. Like Hive is a type of a query language for Hadoop. Gremlin was for Titan. Now, Titan can be installed on Hadoop, or Titan can also be installed separately and do that. Similarly, a little later, what we did was we analyzed the Twitter dataset using Interstellar. The data size. There is a echo. Hello. Yeah, movie Interstellar, as we look at. So again, what we did was we directly connected to Interstellar tweets from Twitter. We used a Twitter API and connected to Hadoop and downloaded that whole data, maybe about 70,000 tweets about Interstellar over a period of 1 month. We downloaded. We used Apache Flume and Hive. Flume was used connected to Twitter API and then connected to HDFS, so that it becomes a sync to HDFS, and we use the JSON SIRDE, that is serialization, deserialization. It's a package, and then it parses the data, and then you can store it using Hive. So from the Hive, you take queries, and then you parse the data, and then you can store it in HDFS. So we convert the raw Twitter data into a tabular form and use the dictionary file to score the sentiment of the number of positive words and compared to the number of negative words, and assigned a positive, negative, or neutral sentiment, and created a new table that includes the sentiment value also. So this is how on the Hadoop environment on Hive you are creating a table, and then you do the program which is running, which is on the using Hive. You did that, and then you do the tweet analysis, right? So that was another problem. And later we moved to another interesting issue, that is graph analytics of citations. So many students search for a good research paper, or PhD work people want to do, find out. So for a new researcher, knowing the research trends will be an important aspect. So we wanted to build a system which will integrate information from different uh, publishers and provide by graphical analysis. So what we did was we got all the information about a paper, and then how the research career of an author has emerged, how the research in a particular field has emerged. So this will actually save a lot of time for a researcher. So how did we do that? Is we looked at IEEE, ACM, Springer, Science Director. We're doing the web scraping and deploying this information over a graph database, and then querying this graph database to get a lot of good results, right? So that is what. So here we have attributes, of a paper, title of the paper, year of the publication, country of the author, author's institute, ISBN number, the PDF, keyword, citation count. All of these were stored. So what we used were Selenium, a beautiful soup, that is a parsing tool, the Titan, and a Gremlin, the query language for Gremlin, and then we used Bulbflow and Rexter and REST API, which could be used. So what could be the sample queries? Number of papers of a particular field published from a given journal, number of papers of a particular field published in a particular year, number of papers of a particular field published from an affiliation, number of papers of a particular field published by a particular researcher. So, variety of queries could be done. But halfway down this project, we had to cool down, because though we could submit as a BTech project, but we were restricted by IEEE, because IEEE was looking that we were downloading a lot of information and then going through that a lot of content. So they said, no, this is not permissible. You cannot download this information, and you cannot get this thing. So we could not do that. But of course, a lot of IEEE databases and others, they are doing it now. So most cited research paper of a particular author, all this information is publicly available, and then you can access it, right? So how many research papers of an author with different publications, tens of number of research papers of different publishers of a particular field, so of a particular supervisor, the different levels of students, and what are all their topics. Like that, you can actually build different examples, right? So of course, there are so many examples like that. So we can go on, right? And you have another important aspect. Let me tell you, okay. Let us look at this entity resolution. Entity resolution also was maybe here it was basically trying to look at duplicates, right? The deduplication or object matching. So many times data is having similar entries or replicate. So those replications must be removed. Like let us say if we collected all the papers, right? Then authors with the same names have been. In fact, we were collecting some papers from about authors from different institutions. So when we collected that data, we saw that few authors combined and wrote these papers. So all the three authors of that paper of a particular department, all three offered them as papers. So first time it was published the first author, second time it was published second author, third time it's coming with the third author. Three times the same paper is mentioned. So that is what is a replication. And what it has to be done is deduplication. That is, the duplicates have to be removed. So, entity resolution is a task of identifying and linking or grouping different manifestations of the same real world object. So examples of manifestations are different ways of addressing, maybe names. Sometimes I am called E.S. Pilli, sometimes I am called Pilli Emmanuel Schubakar, sometimes I am called Emmanuel S. Pilli. So different ways a person can be addressed. But then what you need to do is you need to bring it to one common mechanism. So there must be a mechanism where you will have only the IEEE kind of a reference. So you can try to bring it, or maybe in the email addresses, the way of addressing, and FB accounts, the same person in the text. So web pages with different descriptions of the same business or different photos on the same object. So as we look at, so the central component in data integration and data quality is the entity resolution. So the real world data is said to be dirty for various reasons. As we store the data is very dirty. Now, how do I clear it? Right, as we see database A, database B. So data processing is happening, indexing is happening, record pair comparison is done, then you classify it and then you say whether it is matching or whether it is non-matching, or maybe it is almost close. So then again you have a clerical review. Clerical review with human input. With the human input again you classify and then it matches, so it gives the thought as evaluation. Finally you can do the evaluation. So the whole process for deduplication for entity resolution is given like this. So there are many challenges for entity resolutionship because more and more data sets. So obviously bigger data sets. So if there are some parallel and unrelated data, you need to try to deduplicate it. More heterogeneity. So sometimes it is unstructured, sometimes unclean, sometimes unimportant data, and more linked need for to infer relationships in addition to equality. Multi-relational deal with structures of entities and multiple applications, variety of applications with different accuracy requirements, right? The last kind of an example that I would talk is the tag or the answerer prediction, right? So you have on Stack Overflow, there are many users who will post a question. So now what we want is who will answer. I want to predict, right? Many times the prediction happens, but we don't pass it across, so there is no reply that is coming. So what can be done is if we can do such a kind of recommendation, so you reduce the average amount of time to take and to answer the question. So what you can do is you can directly find out who is the most probable person since 5000 to introduce. So in that case, so what happens is you can recommend a set of users who have posted a question, and then you can actually contact the person who will reply, who will be the answerer. So you can tag him and then you can contact him and then you can get the reply faster. So you can reduce the average amount of time taken to answer a question. So what can be done? You can reduce the number of questions that goes unnoticed and are sometimes eventually closed. So you know, based on the content of your question and all the questions that people have answered, you can correlate them and then you can combine 3 or 4 authors and then you can do that. So this was basically it was available in archive, and then you could download the stock exchange data, and questions posted at huge rate on the site, making it a data problem. Big data dumps are available there. You download it and you can model the stock overflow. So you use the graph database, and then you came up with this same option of how to build it, right? So the basic approach is to give scores to users according to their answers. So as you would have seen in OnePlus or Apple or Samsung, so many times, or Quora, or even on this thing, right? The present thing that we are considering, the data that can be collected is there, and then you know who someone is a master, someone is a very popular person. So there are different names which are given, newbie, fresher, or something like that, and then experienced, and so depending on that, so you know that they will seriously answer. Sometimes it's silly questions which come, so many people may ignore, but if it is a relevant question, somebody or the other will answer, and we will get that. So the basic information is to give scores to users according to their answers, and then we know based on the answers that have been based on the subscription that they have done, they can easily expert users have most points, but they generally don't answer many questions after getting to the peak. And again, it depends on the time zone. It depends on how many hours he may take before he or she sees the result. So that's the question. So what is the idea is to apply basic content filtering and post-processing for modeling availability of users of answer. Click-through rate is also the ratio of users who click on a specific link to the number of total users who view a page. So we have used it and we could check that. So the click-through rate is a very important metric for evaluating the performance. So the click prediction systems are essential and widely used for sponsored search and real-time bidding. So we have been provided 11 days worth of Avazu data to build and test prediction models. So we have predict the probability of Avazu and being checked. So the Kaggle data, the data set was available on Kaggle, and Kaggle is one place. KD Nuggets is another place where you get a lot of data sets for big data, right? Kaggle, Kaggle, Kaggle.com, and KD Nuggets, KDNUGGETS. nuggets, KD nuggets. There also you'll get a lot of data sets. So you have a 10 days click-through data ordered chronologically, and then you can look at the data. And then the test data is 1 day, which is again take a ratio of that. So you can do that. And lastly, what I discussed was multi-classifier using big data. So whenever we see a result that is generated in this thing, it will be difficult to understand. So the methods of ensuring diversity is to manipulation using in classifier input, manipulation in classifier output, and manipulation in classifier model. So cascading multi-classifiers, you would know in machine learning. Similarly, parallel multi-classifiers, you know, you can run kind of voting mechanism and all. And then there can be a sub-orientation which can be done. You can have parallel plus, sequential, parallel plus cascading classifiers that you can have, right? So similarly, you have you take multiple classifiers, and then you take the output of the one, and then similarly you do a similar exercise on feature extraction also, and then the combiner will give you a better classifier. So that is what is the understanding. And then in this case, you are actually giving multiple inputs to multiple output values. So you are combining all of them, and then you are trying to create your own feature extraction algorithm and different algorithms that are there. So classifier 1, classifier 2, so they all can be combined together, and you can get one particular thing. So these are different research challenges which have been there, which we have, some of the students have worked in MNIT Jaipur. Of course, some time has passed by while they did these all aspects. And next, I would like to talk about an important aspect again, that is regarding Spark. Now, most of you would have heard about Spark, and Spark is the programming language which is basically used in the case of what do you say? Spark is basically for a very fast execution. So you use what is called Spark. So when you look at Spark, the basic idea is the time that it takes in MapReduce, Spark will reduce it much further, and it brings it down. The time that it takes is too low. So that is what is very important. And that is what we will try to understand here when we look at Spark. Right. Apache Spark, basically Spark is built on these paper which are there. So as I share the slides, you can go through these Spark papers, and they work on what is called resilient distributed datasets, RDD. And usually the Hadoop framework is very ready to take on Spark, but it needs what do you say, a huge memory requirement. So the RAM is very much needed because it is a memory intensive this thing, and the programming paradigm here used is Python and Scala. So this is what we see. So the MapReduce paper came in 2004, the Google paper came in 2002, 2006 is when Hadoop came in. In 2008, the Hadoop Summit started. In 2010, the Spark paper came, and 2014 it became the Apache Spark. So Spark clustering Spark computing with working datasets, that was 2010. And 2012, you see resilient distributed datasets. So you can read on both these papers. So these papers are available, and then you can they're open source. So what exactly are happening is machine learning algorithms are iterative. Most of the time, the same kind of data is being measured, and then it is basically iterative, and it is running in well. So to perform iterations, earlier use the tools of disk writing. So what happens? Data used to come here, and then results would be generated. The intermediate result was written back to the disk after each iteration, which was making it slow. So the point that happened was, why should we send the data out of the main memory itself? So that was a question. So why should we go and store it in the hard disk and then again retrieve from the hard disk and then again do it? So that is where here what has happened is you have the RDD1, RDD2, and RDD3. So these both are on the disk, and this was also on the disk in the case of normal Hadoop workflow environment. But what Spark did was it put the T1 and T3, T1 and T2, the RDBMS was the RDD1 was done, the resource description, this thing RDD was done in memory, and then the next two things are done in disk, but then the first thing is done in memory, and hence it improves the speed that we look at, right? So a loop outside the system, that is what is the Spark. You can move through the disk and networks. So that is basically, this is the example. So it goes to step, it goes here, it goes here, it goes here. So each time the step goes, it reads from the data and stores in the disk, reads from the data and stores in the disk, reads from the data and stores in the disk. And so then the next part is Spark, where these writing process, this writing, this reading, this writing, this reading, the whole reading writing process is picked up, because what happens is each of the step is done in the memory itself. The memory should be hard, the memory should be allocated, and the memory should be given for that. So users can cache data in the memory and then move forward and do the calculations, which will result in a very high speed. So that is why it is called a lightning fast cluster, basically Apache Spark, based on MapReduce and its extension. So the it is based on Hadoop MapReduce, and it is kind of an alternate for MapReduce, right? You can actually run your Spark codes directly on HDFS, right? And in fact, surprisingly, once my students did this, they don't also need a Hadoop. You can directly run Spark on a normal machine. So because it's a programming paradigm, it's a programming environment, you can actually do that. So when the students did it, the students had a smaller data set, and they could easily do it and show it to me very fast. So then I said, okay, why don't you do it on a bigger data set? So then they understood that a bigger data set won't fit on a single system. If the system doesn't fit on a single system, then you need to set up a Hadoop environment and then only use it. So then they said it took a lot of time. So basically, of course, though Hadoop mechanism, Spark is created for basically to solve some problems, but then Spark can very easily solve some hardware problems which have been coming because of this. So that's what is your understanding needs to be there. So it is based on Hadoop MapReduce, and it extends the MapReduce model to efficiently use it for more types of computations, which include narrative, queries, and stream processing. The main feature is basically the in-memory cluster computing. This is what is the in-memory cluster computing. So instead of taking the data always going back and saving in the hard disks, or in the network attached storage or storage area network, what we try to do is we just keep them in the in the RAMs in the main memory of every system. So basically, Spark is designed to cover a wide range of workloads. It can handle batch applications, iterative algorithms, iterative queries, and streaming. And supporting all these workloads, it also reduces the burden for separate tools. The speed, as you look at, it's 100 times faster in Spark. It's 100 times faster in memory and 10 times faster than the disk, right? So this is possible by reducing the number of read-write operations to the disk. It stores the intermediate processing data in memory, and it supports multiple languages. As I told you, Scala and Python, of course, Java also. But once you can write it in Python, you would not want to do it in Java, because Python is very easy and simple. So you can write applications in different languages. So you have 80 high-level operators for interactive querying. In advanced analytics, Spark not only supports map and reduce, it also supports SQL queries, streaming data, machine learning, and graph algorithms. So all these things are possible, and you can actually load it on HDFS, or you can load it on any other system. So MapReduce is built around an acyclic data flow, which is not suitable for popular access, and applications that reuse a working set of data across multiple parallel operations. So Spark introduces an abstraction called resilient distributed datasets. RDDs, resilient distributed datasets. RDD is a read-only collection of objects partitioned across a set of machines that can be rebuilt if a partition is lost. Spark is implemented in a functional programming language called Scala and outperforms Hadoop by 10x. The resilient distributed memory abstraction that helps programmers perform in memory computations on large clusters in a fault-tolerant manner. So that is what is RDD. So RDDs provide a restricted form of shared memory based on coarse grain transformations rather than fine grained updates. So RDDs are expensive to wide class of computations, right? So the main challenge in designing RDDs is defining a programming interface that can provide fault tolerance effectively. RDDs provide an interface based on coarse grain transformations that apply to the same operation in many data items. RDDs are good for parallel applications. So earlier it was distributed shared memory. So if you look at the reads, they are coarse grained.
Excuse me, sir. Your screen
Yeah.
is not visible, sir.
Screen is not visible. This one?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry. The Spark part you did not see?
No, sir.
You should have told me. Okay, Spark. Is the screen visible now?
Yes, sir. Now it is visible. Thank you, sir.
Okay, you should have told me. Okay, this was the papers that I talked about. So let me quickly review. This is the example that I was showing. Usually the data goes back to tuple. It goes back to the disk. It goes back to the disk. MapReduce task 1, MapReduce task 2, MapReduce task 3. Then it goes back to the tuple. So each time it writes back to the disk and reads from the disk, writes to the disk and reads to the disk, and finally. But in the case of Spark, so some of these tasks are done in memory, right? So that is what is the time savage. So the difference is shown like this. So each time the data is fetched, steps are map or reduce is done, stored, then the next map and reduce is done, then this map and reduce is done. But here what happens is it is stored in memory itself. So the data is in the main memory itself. So of course, to run good Spark programs, you need a huge memory, but you don't need a storage mechanism that is there. So that is something which can be easily looked at, right? So the basic definitions I have talked. So you can look at these slides a little later. The main feature is the in-memory cluster computing, which increases the processing speed of an application. Spark in two advantages. One is it is faster. Second is it can run without Hadoop. Third is it is written in Python, which is definitely quite easier. So that's what is the basic thought, right? Right. And then it introduces an abstraction called resilient distributed data sets, RDDs. And RDD is a read-only collection of objects. And of course, the Spark architecture is something like this. So you can directly run Spark on HDFS. You can run Spark on Yarn or Mesos and sitting on HDFS. Spark can be part of MapReduce and can run on HDFS. So as the streams are moving, it's basically to use Spark on Hadoop, right? So Spark directly also is possible. So Spark introduces an abstraction called RDDs, Resilient Distributed Data, that can be rebuilt if a partition is lost. And Spark is implemented in Scala, and it outperforms Hadoop by 10 times, right? So what is RDD? A distributed memory abstraction that lets programmers perform in-memory computations on large clusters. So in-memory computations is where the whole data is copied into the RAM, and the computations are done, and it doesn't go back to the secondary storage and then comes back to the RAM. Right, most of the computations are done in the RAM itself. So there's a huge storage of time, at least 10 times faster. If on MapReduce you take 1 hour, it will be done in less than 10 minutes in the case of Spark or the RDDs. Hence, people have moved to Spark. Hence, it is a lightning fast application. That's what people talk about. And RDDs provide a restricted form of shared memory based on a coarse grain transformations rather than fine grained upgrades. So that's the comparison that we were looking at. And RDDs provides an interface based on coarse grain transformations like map, filter, and join, which apply the same operation to many data items. So when you look at read, write, consistency, it is very trivial, and fault recovery is there, straggler mitigation, work placement, and behavior if not enough RAM. So behavior, if not there is a poor performance, because a lot of times the RAM is not sufficient, so data is swapped. But if you keep the data sufficient, you can have similar to existence data flow systems where very easily the data flow can be managed, right? Two reasonable additions, basically fast data sharing can be done, and general distributed acyclic graphs can be created, right? So these changes are done. It becomes more efficient for efficient engine, and it is simple for end users. So it's a fast general engine for large scale data processing, developed by UC Berkeley, AMP Labs in 2009 and outsourced in 2010. So this is again an institution, University of California at Berkeley, AMP Labs, and then you outsource it, right? So an example, as you look at, if you look at MapReduce, 100 TB data, similarly 100 TB Spark record, and if you look at 1000 TB or 1 petabyte data, you look at this. So when you look at these combinations that are happening using 2100 nodes, it took 72 minutes. But using only 200 nodes, it took only 23 minutes. Imagine if it was using 2000 nodes here also, it would have been 2 minutes. What took 1 hour is actually taking only 2 minutes, right? So similarly, if you have the similar kind of nodes here, it is 234 minutes. If you are doing it in only, even if it is 190. Let us say if there is again 190 is like 200 times, like 10 times if you increase, this will be like almost the same thing, 23 minutes, right? So for 1000 petabyte data, right, this is 10 times more, but it may take almost the same time. So that is the kind of again virtualized. There are so many cores which are there, which are virtualized, and then the cluster output is also more. And then the sorting rate, if you look at, okay, it is 22.5 GB per minute, but it is only 0.67 GB per minute. So that is where Smart catches out. The Spark ecosystem is some of them are in the alpha stage, some of them have been built. So there's a machine learning library on Spark streaming, and these are available, right? So these are different things. In the BlinkDB, that is the database that is used. Spark SQL to work with structured data. Spark streaming to build fault tolerant streaming applications. MLib for the machine library. GraphX for the graph parallel computation, right? So this is an example of how simple the word count program will be, right? The word count program, which we discussed earlier, if it is done in Python, right? So you read the file and then you say flat my text me. You can you have the readme.md file, and then you can read the file, and then you can split it wherever words are separated by a space. You create tokens and separate them, and then you send them to generate this map function where it generates keyword and one, and then reduce by the keyword and add it. So finally you get the thing, and then store it. So you get WC out. So this is a very simple program in Python, and very easily you could do it. Scala is slightly different, but Scala is also placed there. So you can execute these Spark codes in that, right? So that is something which we can look at, right? So remaining part, I think we will take up tomorrow. So this is how the Spark context is set up. Every Spark program creates a Spark context, which tells Spark how to access a cluster. And in the cluster, the master node usually connects to a cluster manager. So there's a cluster manager to allocate resources, and it acquires executors on the cluster nodes. Executor is found on the cluster node, and you send the app code to the executors, and sends tasks for the executors to run. Similarly, the resilient distributed database, it's a primary abstraction in Spark, and it's a fault-tolerant collection of elements that can be operated on in parallel. RDD can be computed in two ways. One is the Spark standalone mode, and also Spark using Hadoop HDFS. So the standalone mode is the thing where you don't need a HDFS to run Spark programs. So you have a smaller data set, let us say some 100 MB or 200 MB. So without setting up Hadoop, you can directly have the RDD can be computed, and you can have Spark running directly on Windows. But otherwise, or Windows or Linux, right? Otherwise, you usually set up Hadoop on Linux, and on top of that, you run Spark. Okay. and you run the functions on each record of a file in Hadoop distributed file system. So this is how the code goes file. So it's usually the mechanism how it is doing, right? So there are again two types of operations in RDD. Of course, RDD may be a little heavy for you, but if you are very interested in understanding Spark, so you must understand how RDD works. So I can share two papers which are basically the Spark related, the resilient distributed database data sets. So you can try to look at that. So there are one thing is the transformation, the second one is the action. So you can look at some of the transformations and actions, like how do you filter, reduce, union, join, co-group, count, collect. So these transformations and actions will help. And the advantage, as you look at, is Spark is 100 times faster, and you have a lot of high level operators with RDD, as we have seen some of the operators like here. These are some of the operators which have been seen, and it's easy to manage, and real-time analysis can be done using Spark. Spark provides low level, low latency computing also. Spark can process data interactively. You can find out whether the data has been processed, and then you can request for the thing, and then you can also do real-time processing using Spark streaming. But with MapReduce, you cannot do, only batch mode is possible, and interactive mode is not available. So that's how Spark becomes more popular and more famous. So that's where we can look at it. And of course, there are advantages of security. The language that is developed is Scala. The cost is RAM is required, more RAM is required. Programming language is basically Scala, Java, Python, R, and SQL. There is an SQL support by using Spark SQL, as we have seen. The machine learning is available as using MLib. But of course, there are similarities which are available in this thing. And then 20,000 lines of code Spark, that's all. But 1,20,000 lines of code in the case of Hadoop. And caching can also be managed easily. So that is the basic advantages, right? So this is again another version of different words to be introducing Spark, what the definition of Spark and what can be done. Real-time processing can be used, can be done using Spark, but cannot be done using Hadoop. So as day one processing happens, day one, so every day the data can be immediately retrieved and analyzed and given. So this is what actually happens. As we see, the data has to go onto the disk and then it writes. So this is how MapReduce runs. But when you look at what happens on Spark, it sits on the distributed memory, right? So the data is not going back to the disk. It is only on the RAM. So that is the advantage that we look at, right? So these are the iterative operations which are going on MapReduce, how it happens. So you have a query and you get the result 1, result 2, result 3. But here you see that it's all happening in the distributed memory, and all the results are coming at the same time in parallel, right? So Spark can process data in real time. It can handle multiple sources. It is easy to use, and it is faster processing. So that is how you can look at it. And Spark can be combined with Hadoop. So Spark and HDFS, Spark can be run on top of HDFS. Spark can be included in MapReduce and run, and Spark can run on Yarn, right? So these are systems, and Hadoop and Spark, it can still go together. Spark is not intended to replace Hadoop, but can be regarded as an extension to it. But of course, MapReduce can be replaced by Spark. So that is something which we can, they are used together, and sometimes MapReduce is used for batch processing and Spark is used for real-time processing. So these are some words that define Spark and the speed, how Hadoop and basic Spark and Spark plus control partitioning is almost 100 times faster than MapReduce. The basic words are it's very fast speed, it's a polyglot, it's advanced analytics, it's in-memory computation, Hadoop integration is there, and also machine learning is there. This ecosystem we have discussed, the architecture we have seen. So this is what is Spark streaming, right? And more information is this thing. This is the paper that I was talking about, the University of Berkeley paper, where resilient distributed data sets, a fault-tolerant abstraction for in-memory cluster computing. So Spark is nothing but in-memory computing tool, right? So you can take that, right? So we'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, tomorrow we will continue with some more inputs on this.
Sir, shall we ask questions to the participants?
Yeah, any questions?
I think we have no questions, sir.
Yeah, I think you have not understood anything then. Yeah, it takes time. I understand that if you have listened earlier, then I think things would have been very clear now. But listen for the first time, right? A lot of content was covered, so hence it becomes a little difficult for you to catch up, understand. So maybe as you go through the slides once again, and as you implement Hadoop and Spark, Hadoop reduce, then it is the system some of then I think it will not be that difficult. So you can very easily come. So all the best one that you should actually implement, right? That will actually help you. Otherwise, don't install the run. Sports are many examples available and you can actually do those things.
Okay, sir. There are no questions. Shall we close the session, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir. From morning to till now, you have taken so much of patience to explain all the concepts. I think you have explained all the concepts in big data. I think so. Maybe for the first time, it may be difficult for us to understanding. Anyhow, thank you so much, sir, for the nice explanation.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, sir. Bye, sir.